Mr. Speaker, honorable members and fellow Kenyans, it's a great honor to present to this August House and to the country the highlights of the budget for the financial year 2020-21. I do this in performing my fiduciary duty and fulfillment of the requirements of Section 40 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and the Standing Order number 241 of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, allow me to take this early opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, for appointing me to the position of the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning to provide leadership in economic and financial affairs of the country. Mr. Speaker, allow me also to express my deep appreciation to the Chair and members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Finance and National Planning Committee, as well as the departmental committees of the National Assembly for their constructive engagement and support in the review of the financial year 2020-21 budget estimates and the financing measures. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, we submitted to this House the 2020 budget policy statement. During that time, our financial projections assumed a normal operating environment. The economy was projected to grow by 6.1% in 2020, which was an improvement from 5.4% in 2019. Indeed, we had set on a conscious journey of fiscal consolidation, targeting a lower fiscal deficit of 6.3% of GDP in the financial year 2019-2020, 4.9% of GDP in 2020-21, and ultimately 3.0% of GDP over the medium term. This plan was premised on a strong revenue growth, reduction of non-core expenditures, and a gradual slowdown in the growth of the public debt. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that early in the year, this House considered our proposals and approved the economic and financial strategies in the 2020 budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, the global outbreak and the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the contraction of the global economy with disastrous consequences. The pandemic and the attendant containment measures aimed at saving lives have disrupted the business environment, including international trade, leading to loss of livelihood for millions of people globally. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has not been spared. Evidently, the pandemic and the swift containment measures, including the closure of the airspaces and borders, curfews and cessation of movements in some counties, among others, have not only disrupted our ways of lives and livelihoods, but to a great extent, business. These measures, including enforcement of basic hygiene and social distancing, were not only necessary but also timely, as they have indeed stemmed a surge of infections and loss of lives. In addition to the adverse effect of COVID-19 pandemic, our economy also experienced two other shocks. First, the massive invasion of swarms of desert locusts that damaged crops. Secondly, the floods that led to loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, cognizant of the magnitude of the multiple challenges, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, the government moved swiftly to intervene and implement a range of measures to mitigate against the adverse effects. Overall, these measures have provided the much-needed relief to the economy through injection of cash and provision of additional disposable incomes to the people and businesses. Mr. Speaker, the government also lowered the value-added tax rate from 16% to 14%, reduced tax rates from both corporate and personal income from 30% to 25%, and provided 100% tax relief for persons earning a gross monthly income of up to 24,000 Kenya shilling. Further, in order to support the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the turnover tax rate was lowered from 3% to 1%. Mr. Speaker, in order to support the economy, the government instituted various monetary policy measures to enhance credit access by the private sector at an affordable cost. This was achieved through introduction of central bank rates from 8.25% to 7%, and lowering of the cash reserve ratio requirement from 5.2% to 4.25%. Consequently, this intervention released Kenya shilling 35 billion to commercial banks, allowing them flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and disposition. Indeed, since March 2020, banks have restructured loans in excess of Kenya shilling 360 billion, including Kenya shilling 190 billion of personal loans. Further, Mr. Speaker, listing with the credit reference bureaus of any person, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and corporate entities whose loan account falls overdue or is in arrears was temporarily suspended. In addition, in order to enhance liquidity for business, the government provided Kenya shilling 13.1 billion to settle verified pending bills owed by ministries and departments, and a further Kenya shilling 10 billion for payment of verified VAT refund claims. Mr. Speaker, to cushion the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, the government provided an additional Kenya shilling 10 billion to boost the ongoing traditional current cash transfer program. Similarly, the government allocated Kenya shilling 1 billion to recruit health workers to strengthen the health capital capacity of the Ministry of Health, while allocating Kenya shilling 400 million for food and non-food commodities for affected households. Mr. Speaker, the government also established the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund to receive voluntary contributions from well-wishers towards defraying expenses associated with this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, in order to gainfully engage our youth, the government rolled out the Kazi Mtaani program designed to improve public hygiene standards and undertake urban civil works. Already, 26,000 youth are engaged in the pilot phase. To further cushion citizens and business from the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic and to stimulate economic activity going forward, His Excellency the President, on May 23, 2020, unveiled an 8-point economic stimulus program. I'll be elaborating on the economic stimulus program later in my statement. Mr. Speaker, over the last few months, revenue collections shrank considerably due to slowed economic activities attributed to COVID-19 pandemic. Conversely, there was a rise in public expenditures to address the targeted interventions. In light of this, the government reached out to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for additional funding. Indeed, the response from the development partners was prompt and also generous. A number of them provided assistance in form of grants and highly concessional funds and personal protective equipment. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight some of the significant financial assistance that Kenya has received from multilateral partners. First, the country received Kenya shilling 78.3 billion under the Rapid Credit Facility of the International Monetary Fund to help address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This financial support is fully concessional at zero interest rate. Second, we received Kenya shilling 108 billion from the World Bank under the second development policy operation as both budgetary support and extra resources to help fight the pandemic. At the initial phase of the COVID-19 outbreak, the World Bank extended support of Kenya shilling 6.8 billion under the contingency emergency response to the Ministry of Health for prompt preparation and response. Mr. Speaker, the government has also received Kenya shilling 22.5 billion from the African Development Bank as a concessional loan, an additional Kenya shilling 7.5 billion commitments from the European Union in form of grants. With this support, Mr. Speaker, will not only strengthen our healthcare systems with the requisite equipment, supplies, and medical personnel to respond to the pandemic, but also fund other critical interventions in the budget. We express our sincere gratitude to our bilateral development partners and multilateral institutions for standing with us during this challenging time. Mr. Speaker, the financial year 2020-21 budget responds to the current challenges facing Kenyans, businesses, and the economy at large in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. It's in this context that we have chosen the theme for this budget as stimulating the economy to safeguard livelihoods, jobs, businesses, and industrial recovery. The theme underscores our determination to protect lives and livelihoods and cushion vulnerable citizens against the adverse effects of COVID-19. This is further expected to create and protect jobs, stimulate industrial growth, and ultimately steer economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, to sustain efforts towards the full recovery of the economy, the government is currently developing a post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy under the leadership of His Excellency the President. The strategy will not only accelerate economic recovery, but is designed to provide a roadmap for transition to a new development framework beyond the current Vision 2030. Mr. Speaker, Allow me now to highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, in framing this budget, we have taken into account recent economic developments on the global and domestic scene. The budget was prepared against a background of a contracting global economy occasioned by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disrupted most aspects of human life. Indeed, most world economies remain on lockdown. As a result, in April 2020, the IMF projected that the world economy will experience negative growth rate of 3% in 2020. This is worse than the growth rate reported during the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. However, on a positive note, world economic growth is projected to rebound to 5.8% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, overall, economic growth in advanced economies is projected to contract by 6.1% in 2020, while that of emerging and developing countries, including China, India, Russia, and Brazil, is expected to contract by 1% in 2020. Equally, economies in sub-Saharan Africa region are projected to contract by 1.6% in 2020 before a rebound to grow by 4.1% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Kenyan economy is confronted by the impact of desert locusts and floods that have caused deaths, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure across the country. From these three simultaneous shocks, all sectors of the economy have been adversely affected. Agricultural sector, for example, has been hit hard by the low global demand for agricultural products, especially horticulture, tea, and coffee, among others. Further, the reduction in availability of raw materials and intermediate goods following closure of international borders has negatively affected the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, taking into account the impact of these shocks on the domestic economy, growth is now projected at a lower rate of 2.5% in 2020, down from 5.4% growth recorded in 2019. Moving forward, so as to boost economic activities and foster higher growth rates, we shall not only implement a rapid economic stimulus program, but also lay down a firm post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy. These initiatives are ultimately expected to stimulate economic activities, thereby culminating to a growth of 5.8% in 2021 and 6.5% by 2024. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, our chosen fiscal consolidation plan has been adversely affected by the events over the last 6 months. In this respect, we are now targeting a fiscal deficit of 8.3% of GDP in financial year 2019-2020, from the previous target of 6.3% of GDP. In the financial year 2020-21, the fiscal deficit is targeted at 7.5% of GDP and is expected to improve to 6.1% of GDP in financial year 2021-22. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, the rest of my statement will outline specific measures aimed at stimulating the economy so as to safeguard livelihoods, including jobs, businesses, and facilitate faster industrial recovery. I will thereafter present a fiscal framework that sets out the resource envelope underpinning this budget and enumerate spending priorities. Finally, I'll provide highlights of tax and other policy measures that we are proposing to support economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the recent shocks experienced by the economy, we are still confronted by the perennial challenges of high incidence of poverty and unemployment, frequent droughts, low agricultural and industrial productivity, inadequate decent housing, growing demands for high investment in the health sector, inadequate revenue, and other forms of financing and governance-related issues. Mr. Speaker, these challenges, including the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic, require bold actions if we are to position our country on a sustainable economic growth trajectory. Through this budget, therefore, Mr. Speaker, our focus will be, first, to roll out an economic stimulus program that will catalyze economic activity, provide livelihoods to Kenyans, and enable businesses to recover from the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic. I will shortly enumerate the various initiatives under their funding. Second, maintaining macroeconomic stability to support long-term investments, economic growth and development. Towards this end, we aim to strike an appropriate balance between support for economic recovery and continued fiscal discipline. This will be achieved through effective coordination of fiscal, monetary, and financial policies to lower the cost of living and doing business. Mr. Speaker, whereas Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, we need to be cautious about future debt accumulation. Our focus, therefore, will be to strengthen management of public debt to minimize costs and risk of the portfolio, while accessing external concessional funding to finance development projects. Further, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that security of our people, property and investments remain key. In this regard, I'll be proposing allocation of funds to strengthen our security and investigative agencies. This is because a secure and conducive business environment will attract foreign direct investment that's necessary for economic recovery. Third, to support the recovery and growth of micro, small, and medium enterprises through various interventions, including operationalization of the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Mr. Speaker, to further expand opportunities for local enterprises and micro, small, and medium enterprises, we shall gazette and enforce the list of items for local procurement to promote the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya initiative. Fourth, to continue supporting implementation of the Big Four agenda. In this regard, therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will later in this statement be proposing allocations to the drivers and enablers of the Big Four agenda. Fifth, enhance allocations to support development of critical infrastructure in the country, such as roads, rail, energy, and water, among others, so as to reduce the cost of doing business as well as promote competitiveness. Sixth, increase resources to support the youth, women, and persons with disability to enable them actively contribute to economic recovery agenda. Seven, to scale up resource allocation to improve access to education, strengthen healthcare systems, and enhance cash transfers to support the vulnerable members of our society. Eighth, continue to facilitate county governments in strengthening their system to enhance service delivery. In this respect, I urge county governments which have not completed paying verified pending bills or to various suppliers to do so expeditiously. And ninth, implement various structural reforms to enhance the efficiency of public service delivery while at the same time ensuring accountability for sustained macroeconomic and fiscal stability, better credit ratings, improve fiscal discipline, and minimize corruption. Mr. Speaker, allow me at this point to elaborate on the 8-point economic stimulus program that the government will be implementing to stimulate and sustain economic activities. I will thereafter briefly highlight plans for developing the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, which is linked to the post-2030 vision. Mr. Speaker, the 8-point economic stimulus program targets to cushion vulnerable citizens and businesses, particularly those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The stimulus program will focus on keeping the food supply chains functional while promoting the use of locally produced goods and services, thus securing the livelihoods of daily wage earners. Mr. Speaker, we have set aside Kenya shilling 56.6 billion to cater for the various thematic areas of the program. Mr. Speaker, in the first theme covers the infrastructure and is designed to rehabilitate road networks across the country as a direct response to the damages occasioned by the recent heavy rains. The rehabilitation of access roads and footbridges will optimize the use of local labor and materials, thereby generating short-term employment for thousands of youth. Towards this end, I propose to allocate Kenya shilling 5 billion for rehabilitation of the damaged access roads and footbridges. Further, Mr. Speaker, to address the issue of youth unemployment and empowerment in urban informal settlement, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10 billion under the Kazi Mtaani program. This Kazi Mtaani program will be targeting unemployed youth in the major cities and urban settlements of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Eldoret, Nakuru, and other major towns across the country. The youth will be engaged in fumigation, stormwater drainage works, cleaning of markets and informal settlements, rehabilitation and maintenance of access roads, footbridges and footpaths, and other environmental management activities. The Kazi Mtaani program targets to employ at least 200,000 youth. Mr. Speaker, the second theme seeks to improve education outcomes in the country. The objective is to get thousands of unemployed teachers off the bench and into action as intern teachers, while also supporting local artisans and builders' businesses. To meet this commitment, Kenya shilling 7.4 billion has been proposed. Mr. Speaker, out of these, Kenya shilling 2.1 billion will go to construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools. Kenya shilling 1.9 billion for provision of at least 250,000 locally fabricated desks for secondary and primary schools. Kenya shilling 700 million for capitation and improvement of infrastructure in low-cost boarding schools in arid and semi-arid lands using local labor. Kenya shilling 2.4 billion for recruitment of 10,000 intern teachers to support the 100% transition schools, and Kenya shilling 300 million for recruitment of 1,000 ICT interns to support digital learning in public schools. Mr. Speaker, the third theme targets to support micro, small, and medium enterprises. Despite their important contribution, this sector has continued to face challenges of accessing credit due to lack of sufficient collateral, high cost of credit, and informal business structure. These challenges have been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. With the reduced turnover and disruptions in the market and supply chains, many micro, small, medium enterprises are unlikely to attract affordable and quality credit under the traditional arrangements. Mr. Speaker, in order to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprise, I have set aside shilling 3 billion seed capital to operationalize the credit guarantee scheme. The scheme will enable the provision of affordable credit in an efficient and structured manner. In addition to this, we are also actively engaging a number of development agencies who have shown willingness to put in additional resources to support this scheme. Mr. Speaker, to further support and enhance the liquidity of these enterprises, I propose to fast-track payment of outstanding verified VAT refund claims and pending bills owed to businesses by allocating Kenya shilling 10 billion. This is in addition to the Kenya shilling 23.1 billion approved by this House in April 2020 in the supplementary budget for the same purpose. Mr. Speaker, the fourth theme prioritizes improvement in health outcomes. Evidently, the COVID-19 pandemic has overstretched our healthcare system. The government has made significant efforts to contain the spread of the virus through various protocols and containment measures, which entail promotion of hygiene and restriction of movements. Mr. Speaker, building on these measures in a way that ensures more Kenyans are gainfully engaged and support local industries, and to further enhance capacity of the healthcare system, Kenya shilling 1.2 billion is proposed for the recruitment of an additional cohort of 5,000 healthcare workers to support local health staff for a period of 1 year. This will enhance our COVID-19 response capabilities and strengthen implementation of the Universal Health Coverage Program. Mr. Speaker, we have also allocated an additional shilling 500 million to supply 20,000 locally made beds and beddings to public hospitals, and shilling 25 million to support the establishment of 50 modern walk-through sanitizers at our border points and main hospitals across the country. Mr. Speaker, the fifth theme will focus on agriculture and food security. I have set aside shilling 3 billion to subsidize the supply of farm inputs through the e-voucher system to reach 200,000 small-scale farmers. I have also allocated shilling 3.5 billion for expanded community household irrigation. These will caution farmers from the adverse effects of weather and further secure food supply chains. Further, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 1.5 billion to assist flower and horticultural farmers to access international market during this period when we are experiencing low cargo traffic in and out of the country. These interventions will support and sustain the farming communities as they will provide employment to thousands of workers in our agricultural sector. Mr. Speaker, the sixth theme for the program is to support the tourism sector. Tourism is one of the worst hit sectors by the pandemic. This is reflected by massive cancellation of hotel bookings occasioned by lockdown and travel bans imposed by various countries in an effort to minimize the spread of the virus. The resultant effect has been has been massive job and income losses by many Kenyans directly and indirectly employed in the tourism sector. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, to support this critical sector, the government has initiated a number of urgent measures, including a temporary lifting of the ban to hold meetings in private hotels by government agencies. The government has also waived landing and parking fees at our airports in order to facilitate movement of cargo in and out of Kenya. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, the government will scale up efforts to boost the tourism sector by promoting aggressive post-COVID-19 tourism marketing and providing support for hotel refurbishment through soft loans to be channeled through the Tourism Finance Corporation. Shilling 3 billion has been set aside to support the renovation of facilities and the restructuring of business operations by actors in this industry. Mr. Speaker, the government will also provide grants to 160 community conservancies and support to Kenya Wildlife Services to engage 5,500 community scouts for a period of 1 year. To support these initiatives, I propose to set aside shilling 2 billion in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the seventh theme seeks to improve environment, water and sanitation facilities, as well as mitigate the adverse effects of floods. On these, I have set aside shilling 1 billion to support flood control using local labor in the most affected areas. I have also set aside shilling 850 million to cater for rehabilitation of wells, water pumps, and underground tanks in nasal areas using local labor, and shilling 540 million to enhance tree planting program across the country using locally sourced seedlings. Mr. Speaker, the eighth and the final theme of the stimulus program is manufacturing. In this area, the government will promote the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya policy. To this end, we propose an initial investment of shilling 600 million to purchase locally assembled vehicles. These will sustain the operation of local motor vehicle manufacturers, which is aimed at safeguarding jobs. Mr. Speaker, I further propose an allocation of shilling 712 million to provide credit targeted to micro, small, and medium enterprises in the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, in addition to implementing the economic stimulus program that I have enumerated, the government is formulating a post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy to mitigate the adverse impacts on the economy and further reposition the economy on a steady and sustainable growth trajectory. Mr. Speaker, the post-COVID economic recovery strategy will focus on the following. 1, sound macroeconomic policy framework to support higher sustainable economic growth that will address the challenges of poverty, unemployment, and income inequality. 2, adequate local and foreign resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs. 3, enhancing the role of the private sector in the economy, including financing infrastructure projects from diverse sources such as public-private partnership and lease financing. 4, supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises by facilitating access to adequate finances through credit guarantee scheme. 5, full and timely implementation of the economic stimulus program, which will create jobs and stimulate business. 6, investment in the ICT and digital infrastructure to support the use of digital platforms to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. 7, promotion of local production processes and domestic supply value chains. 8, enhancement of disaster risk management systems. 9, improvement of social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. And 10, strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems for quality outcomes of the project. Mr. Speaker, in preparing the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, we will ensure the process is all-inclusive. To this end, we'll draw inputs and ideas from diverse groups, including experts from both county and national government, private sector, development partners, academia, and research institutions, and other relevant stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to note that we are less than 10 years to the end of our long-term development blueprint, the Kenya Vision 2030. As we conclude this implementation, we need to think of the next development framework for this country. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, the preparation of the next long-term development plan will benefit from this post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy. The new plan, beyond the Kenya Vision 2030, will take cognizance of the transition of sustainable development goals of United Nations and the African Union Agenda 2063. This will be a precursor to 100 years of Kenya's independence celebration. Mr. Speaker, to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and enhance accountability and transparency in our conduct of business, I propose the following structural reforms. Mr. Speaker, since enactment, the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act 2015 has been operating without the supporting regulations. However, I am pleased to report that the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulations 2020 have been published and are awaiting parliamentary approval. These regulations seek to enhance uniformity of operations across the procuring entities and promote the local economy through affirmative interventions on preferences and reservations. On e-procurement, Mr. Speaker, the government has finalized the e-government procurement strategy. According to this strategy, the government will procure and roll out an end-to-end e-procurement system by end of December 2020. Under the e-procurement system, all procurement processes will be undertaken on an online platform where benefits will accrue to the government procuring entities in terms of cost reduction, speed, transparency, accountability, and visibility. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure the growth and sustainability of enterprises owned by women, youth, and persons living with disability, the National Treasury has re-engineered the access to government procurement opportunities portal to enable real-time registration and transparent monitoring of the implementation of the scheme. The system has also been linked to other government institutions, including Kenya Revenue Authority, National Council for Persons with Disability, Registrar of Companies, and IFMIS to facilitate faster verification and reporting. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury has directed all procuring entities to ensure prompt payment for all contracts performed by these target groups. Mr. Speaker, allow me to focus my attention on the construction industry, where I believe we can create the much-needed jobs for the youth by hiring local contractors. The government is aware that local contractors in general have had challenges of undertaking infrastructure projects due to limited technical, financial, and managerial capacities. This has resulted in participation of more foreign contractors in local contracts at the expense of local contractors. In this respect, the government will review the contracting framework for infrastructure projects in the country with a view of ensuring participation of local contractors in local contracts. These will retain domestic revenues within the country and create jobs for the youth contractors. Mr. Speaker, the restriction placed on businesses and services as a result of COVID-19 pandemic have had significant adverse effects on the performance of strategic state-owned enterprises offering essential services. Given the contingent liabilities that may arise thereof, I have constituted a technical team at the National Treasury and Planning to review the challenges facing state-owned enterprises and recommend remedial actions within 90 days. On pending bills, Mr. Speaker, we have noted that several state corporations and semi-autonomous agencies hold significant amounts of pending bills owed to contractors, suppliers, SACCO remittances, and other statutory deductions. This practice should not be allowed to continue. Mr. Speaker, following a cabinet directive, the National Treasury constituted a pending bills multi-agency team to deal with the existing historical and contested pending bills. Significant progress has been made to settle some of the pending bills. I direct all principal secretaries and accounting officers to clear all pending bills in the MDAs and SAGAs, respectively. Further, Mr. Speaker, going forward, the National Treasury may withhold exchequer releases to the MDAs or SAGAs with pending bills until an approved payment plan for all pending bills is agreed upon. Mr. Speaker, the continued growth and competitiveness of our financial services sector is critical in supporting economic development. I wish to state that our financial sector remains strong and stable despite the shocks occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, The banking sector remains stable and resilient, with strong liquidity and capital adequacy ratios. The Central Bank of Kenya has been closely monitoring the sector to identify vulnerabilities, especially those associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. The bank has been at the forefront and has rolled out various policy and regulatory measures to support the sector. Mr. Speaker, during the last 1 year, the government, through Central Bank of Kenya, rolled out a mobile-based service to facilitate retail investors participate in government securities, a convenience to investors during this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, in order to strengthen our position as regional financial hub, the National Treasury is in the process of operationalizing the Nairobi International Financial Center. The center will play an important role in attracting investments and private capital to support economic growth, as well as mobilizing additional financing for the Big Four projects and further providing new financing options for Kenyan businesses. Mr. Speaker, to enhance the safety and integrity of our financial system, the National Treasury, together with other stakeholders, will conduct Kenya's first national risk assessment on money laundering and terrorism financing. This will assist the country's competent authorities to assign responsibilities for combating money laundering and terrorism financing to the relevant government agencies on the basis of identified risks and vulnerabilities. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of housing units and limited access to affordable long-term finance remain a leading house market constraint. To address this challenge, the government established the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, whose main purpose is to provide long-term funds to primary housing mortgage providers in the housing sector. In this regard, the company will offer fixed-rate long-term loans at concessional rates to mortgage providers who are expected to pass the benefit to citizens at a lower than market rates. The company has raised capital of Kenyan shilling 2 billion, while the National Treasury has mobilized additional Kenyan shilling 35 billion from development partners to support the company's operations. Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company will help to maintain adequate liquidity among primary housing mortgage providers in order to keep housing finance and the housing market functioning. This will avert potential credit crunch that will hurt lower-income households and interrupt efforts to support affordable housing. Mr. Speaker, the new company is also expected to play a significant role in the structuring of the proposed National Credit Guarantee Scheme in order to create an effective backstop mortgage guarantee component to cover the losses incurred by the lenders on future home loans. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2015, the investment guidelines under the retirement benefits regulations were amended to allow pension schemes to invest up to 10% of their assets in private equity funds and venture capital funds licensed by the Capital Markets Authority. However, the Capital Market Act was not amended to provide for regulations of this private equity and the venture capital. In this regard, I have proposed amendment to the Capital Market Act to provide for the regulation of private equity and venture capital companies by the authority. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to remove the function of payment of beneficiaries from collected and claimed dividends, since these are functions currently domiciled and an unclaimed financial assets authority. Mr. Speaker, the increasing public pension budget and accumulation of pension claims remain a challenge. In this regard, the National Treasury is re-engineering and upgrading the pension systems in order to clear all pension payments backlogged by the end of the calendar year. This will pave way for a modernized pension management system that will guarantee smooth transition of retirees from a monthly salary check to a monthly pension payment. To ease the pension burden on the exchequer, the National Treasury is committed to roll out the Public Service Superannuation Scheme in the financial year 2020-21. Further, Mr. Speaker, to support the pension sector in general, the government is developing a national retirement benefits policy that will harmonize all pension laws. This will strengthen the legal and regulatory framework to achieve a comprehensive pension coverage across the formal and informal sectors and better protect the interests of beneficiaries and right of pension contributors. Mr. Speaker, in September 2019, this House approved the County Government Retirement Scheme, which provides for the establishment of an umbrella retirement scheme for county government. Thereafter, petitions were filed in courts challenging the law, thus paralyzing its operation. To this effect, the National Treasury undertook to pursue all legal means to resolve this matter and ensure that county government employees have a scheme that safeguards members' pensions. Mr. Speaker, further, the government is working on establishing a national micro-pension scheme with a sustainable model that combines long-term saving with short-term needs that will be open to all marginalized informal workers who constitute over 80% of Kenya's labor force. Mr. Speaker, the Retirement Benefits Authority Act does not provide for sanctions in case of failure or delay in submission of the actuarial valuation reports within the specified period. In this regard, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Authority Act to impose a penalty to pension scheme who fail to submit actuarial valuation reports to the authority within the specified timeline. The actuarial valuation reports are important in determining the performance of the scheme. Mr. Speaker, framework for responding to disasters in Kenya are fragmented across laws. These has hampered the ability of government to respond to disasters more effectively. To address this challenge, the government will develop a harmonized disaster risk management legal framework to guide the management of disasters in Kenya. To this end, we shall also finalize the Disaster Management Fund regulations to facilitate effective and efficient response to disasters in a more coordinated manner. Mr. Speaker, globally, climate change is a key concern, like other countries. The Kenyan economy is vulnerable to its effects. Over the last 10 years, we have experienced increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather. Mr. Speaker, in order to minimize the adverse effects of this phenomenon on the economy, we need to pursue a green economic development path. In this regard, the National Treasury proposed to tap into the green climate financing by issuing the first sovereign green bond to finance major infrastructure projects in the financial 2020-21. These proceeds will be directed towards green projects at both the national and county level. Mr. Speaker, execution of the budget for 2019-2020 has progressed well despite the challenges of reduced revenue performance. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only worsened revenue performance in 2019-2020, but will affect revenue in 2020-21 budget. In particular, import-related taxes such as import duty, VAT on imports, import declaration fees, and rural development levy have been negatively affected due to lower imports and reduction of trade among countries. Further, other domestic taxes have been severely affected by declining incomes and depressed consumptions. As noted earlier in my statement, in order to cushion Kenyans against the adverse impact of the pandemic and to further increase liquidity in the economy, the government lowered tax rates for corporate and personal incomes, turnover tax, value-added tax, and provided tax relief to low-income earners and employees. These measures are estimated to cost the exchequer Kenya 172 billion in revenue foregone by government in one financial year. Mr. Speaker, in order to recoup part of this revenue loss, we submitted this House proposals to lower the level of tax exemptions. It is important to note that in the year 2018, the tax revenue foregone by government through tax incentives, or for that matter exemptions, amounted to Kenya 535 billion, or 6% of GDP, which is considered one of the highest levels globally. Whereas these tax incentives are well intended, they have limited the capacity of government to fund critical expenditures. In addition, a critical review of the incentive shows that consumers have not benefited through commensurate reduction in cost of the goods and services. Further, some of these incentives have given undue advantage to some sector players over others, thus entrenching unfairness and stifling competition. Mr. Speaker, This therefore necessitated a review of the existing laws incentive regime with a view to minimizing distortions and providing a level playing ground for all taxpayers. In this respect, I have proposed further removal of some existing tax exemptions through the Finance Bill 2020. I urge honorable members of this House to support this endeavor that's expected to grow revenues for funding critical social and infrastructure programs. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Revenue Authority has undertaken various reforms to enhance revenue mobilization. We shall continue to support and strengthen the capacity of the Kenya Revenue Authority to enable them collect revenues to fund government programs. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal framework for 2020-21 budget and the medium term has been revised to take into account the adverse impacts of the pandemic on revenue performance. In this respect, the 2020-21 budget targets revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, of Kenya shilling 1.89 trillion, which is equivalent to 16.8% of GDP. This is a stagnation from the estimated revenues of Kenya shilling 1.89 trillion, equivalent to 18.6% of GDP in the financial year 2019-2020. Of these, ordinary revenues in the financial year 2020-21 are projected at Kenya shilling 1.63 trillion, equivalent to 14.5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, total expenditures in the financial year 2020-21 are projected at Kenya shilling 2.79 trillion, or 24.7% of GDP from the estimated levels of Kenya shilling 2.77 trillion, or 27.2% of GDP in 2019-2020. The recurrent expenditures in the financial year 2020-21 will amount to Kenya shilling 1.82 trillion, or 16.2% of GDP. On the other hand, ministerial development expenditures that include foreign finance projects, allocation to contingency funds, and conditional capital transfers to the county government are projected at Kenya shilling 633.1 billion in 2020-21. This will enhance critical infrastructure in the budget. Mr. Speaker, taking into account the projected revenues and expenditure in the financial year 2020-21, the fiscal deficit, including grants, is projected to decline to Kenya shilling 840.6 billion, or 7.5% of GDP, from Kenya shilling 842.7 billion, or 8.3% of GDP in the financial 2019-2020. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, as we roll out the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, we remain committed to gradually lowering the fiscal deficit to Kenya shilling 768.8 billion, or 6.1% of GDP in the financial year 2021-22, and further to Kenya shilling 570.4 billion, or 3.6% of GDP by 2023-24. In the financial year 2020-21, the fiscal deficit of Kenya shilling 840.6 billion will be financed through net external financing of Kenya shilling 347 billion, or 3.1% of GDP, net financing of Kenya shilling 493.4 billion, or 4.4% of GDP, and other net domestic repayment of Kenya shilling 627 million. Mr. Speaker, to achieve these targets, we will continue to contain growth in non-core recurrent spending and enhance our efforts in revenue mobilization. In this respect, we shall closely monitor the economic impact of COVID-19, and once the economy recovers, we'll review our fiscal plan, including tax measures, to strengthen public finances to sustainably fund our development agenda. Mr. Speaker, the government is concerned about perennial low absorption of donor funds that has denied Kenyans the full benefit of this financing. To remove impediments in the project's implementation and scale up absorption of donor funds, the government will put in place appropriate policies and administrative measures. These may involve reallocation of funds from slow-moving projects or non-startup projects to other priority projects and programs to minimize payments of unnecessary fees and charges. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the state of our public debt. Our debt remains sustainable despite some of the debt burden indicators deteriorating due to impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has elevated expenditure pressures, reduced revenues, and export earnings. The debt burden is projected to decline over the medium term in line with the fiscal consolidation plan and implementation. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to implement the 2020 medium-term debt strategy, which recommends a shift towards concessional external borrowing and lengthening of maturity structure of the domestic debts. In addition, the debt and borrowing policy approved in early 2020 will guide management of public debt. Mr. Speaker, as an alternative source of finance to fund public projects, the government shall revitalize the public-private partnership framework. Indeed, public-private partnerships have the potential to accelerate economic growth and development by crowding in private sector participation in the financing of capital-intensive infrastructure projects. Mr. Speaker, the reforms in this area will include amending the PPP Act to remove unnecessary approvals and redundant processes, as well as restructure and strengthen institutions responsible for implementing such projects. The government will also streamline and standardize the appropriate credit enhancement tool, including the government letter of support, partial risk guarantees, and indemnity guarantees, as well as viability gap funding where necessary, to enhance bankability of projects. Mr. Speaker, the government, through these arrangements, targets to mobilize approximately $200 billion in the financial year 2020-21 by concluding the financing of several projects that are currently at advanced stage of negotiation. These projects are drawn from, among others, the transport, energy, health, housing, and manufacturing sectors of the economy. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the highlights of the government spending priorities in the coming financial year. The total program spending for the financial 2020-21, excluding redemptions, amounts to shilling 2.79 trillion. Mr. Speaker, the budget for financial 2020-21 will continue the implementation of the Big Four agenda. Thus, the targeted expenditures prioritize employment creation, youth empowerment, supporting manufacturing activities, enhancing health coverage, improving food security, and living conditions through affordable housing. To support these initiatives, I have set aside shilling 128.3 billion for the Big Four agenda drivers and enablers. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to prioritize healthcare by scaling up universal health coverage to all the counties. To improve health outcomes, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 111.7 billion to the health sector in this budget. Out of this, shilling 50.3 billion is for activities and programs for the attainment of universal health coverage by the drivers and enablers. Mr. Speaker, the budget for the health sector includes shilling 19.2 billion to address and lower cases of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis in the country. Shilling 6.2 billion for the managed service equipment. Shilling 5.3 billion to transform the healthcare systems for universal health coverage. Shilling 4.1 billion to cater for free maternity health care, and shilling 1.8 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled in our society. Mr. Speaker, other allocations to improve health service delivery includes shilling 15 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital, shilling 10 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, shilling 7.2 billion for Kenya Medical Training Centers, shilling 2.5 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, shilling 1.2 billion to Madari Hospital, and shilling 4.3 billion as a conditional grant to level 5 hospitals in the counties. Mr. Speaker, to ensure the success of affordable housing program, the government continues to forge partnerships with the private sector and development partners. In this budget, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 15.5 billion to the housing, urban development, and public works sector. Out of these, shilling 6.9 billion will cater for the affordable housing program undertaken by the driver and enablers. We are also concluding discussions to bring on board an additional Kenya shilling 3.6 billion from the African Development Bank, Kenya shilling 7.5 billion for the Kenya Urban Program, and Kenya shilling 1.1 billion for the ongoing construction of Gikomba, Githurai, Chaka, Kamkunji, and Dagoretti markets. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to scale up reforms to promote investment in the manufacturing sector to support and protect local industries. To promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 18.3 billion for this cluster. Of these, Kenya shilling 1.4 billion will go to the Kenya Industrial Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shilling 3.5 billion for the development of Special Economic Zone, Textile Park in Naivasha, Kenanie Leather Industrial Park, and at the River Textile Hub. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside Kenya shilling 843 million to support modernization of Rivertex, Kenya shilling 800 million for the development of various micro, small, and medium enterprises in Kenya, Kenya shilling 715 million for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 500 million to support the dairy processing, and Kenya shilling 3 billion for the Ongokundu Special Economic Zone. Mr. Speaker, the government remains committed to reducing the number of food insecure Kenyans. Towards this end, the government will continue to expand irrigation schemes, support large-scale production of staples, increase access to agricultural inputs, implement programs to support smallholder farmers, and promote the use of appropriate farming techniques. Mr. Speaker, to support these initiatives, I have set aside shilling 52.8 billion for food and nutritional security. Out of this, Kenya shilling 10.6 billion has been proposed for the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Project, Kenya shilling 5.5 billion for the National Agricultural and Rural Inclusivity Project, Kenya shilling 4.1 billion for the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, Kenya shilling 730 million for the Food Security and Crop Diversification Project, and Kenya shilling 10 billion for irrigation land reclamation. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include Kenya shilling 1.8 billion to enhance aquaculture business development project, Kenya shilling 1.4 billion to support small-scale irrigation and value addition, Kenya shilling 1.3 billion to enhance resilience of pastoral communities, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion to enhance drought resilience and sustainable livelihood, Kenya shilling 1.6 billion to support processing and registration of title deeds, and Kenya shilling 500 million to advance agricultural loans through Agricultural Finance Corporation. Mr. Speaker, allow me to turn to other proposed expenditures that are critical in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to scale up the construction of a robust network of high-quality roads, railways, sea, and airports to enable Kenyans to enjoy the benefits of expanded infrastructure assets and improve our competitiveness. Towards this end, I propose an allocation of Kenya shilling 172.4 billion. This is in addition to allocation that I have already set aside for the economic stimulus program and the Big Four agenda, which support construction of roads and bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, I have set aside Kenya shilling 18.1 billion for SGR Phase 2, Kenya shilling 6 billion for the LAPSET project, Kenya shilling 5 billion for the Mombasa Port Development Project, and Kenya shilling 328 million for the insurance of ferries for the Likoni Channel. Mr. Speaker, to support generation of adequate and affordable energy, I have set aside Kenya shilling 63.3 billion, excluding the allocation for the Big Four agenda. Out of these, Kenya shilling 50.8 billion will cater for transmission and distribution of power, Kenya shilling 9.3 billion for development of geothermal energy, Kenya shilling 6.8 billion for electrification of public institutions, and Kenya shilling 900 million for provision of transformers in constituencies, development of nuclear energy, and exploration and mining of coal. Mr. Speaker, ensuring a safe and secure environment is vital in our drive to attain economic transformation. Towards this end, government will strengthen the security agencies by equipping them in order to increase their effectiveness and rapid response to incidents of crime. Mr. Speaker, to support security operations in the country, I have proposed Kenya shilling 167.9 billion in this budget to our security agencies, Defense, and national intelligence services, leasing of police motor vehicles, national communication and surveillance systems, police modernization, and the equipping of the National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 3.4 billion for medical insurance, shilling 2.2 billion for group personal insurance for the National Police and Prison Services, and shilling 1 billion for the National Integrated Identity Management Systems. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to make sustained investments in the education sector in order to enhance access to quality basic and higher education. In this budget, I have set aside shilling 497.7 billion to fund programs in this sector. This accounts for 26.7% of the budget. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed shilling 59.4 billion to cater for free day secondary education program, and shilling 12.4 billion for free primary education program. Mr. Speaker, to increase the teacher-to-student ratio, I have proposed shilling 2 billion for the recruitment of 5,000 teachers. This is further to the provision for hiring at least 10,000 teachers in terms under the economic stimulus program. To improve health conditions and support education, achievement of our school-going children, I have set aside shilling 1.8 billion for the school feeding program. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector includes shilling 6.3 billion for the construction and equipping of technical institutions and vocational training centers, shilling 4 billion for examination fees waiver for all Class 8 and Form 4 candidates, shilling 800 million for the digital literacy program and competency-based curriculum, shilling 323 million for the National Research Fund, shilling 94.9 billion to support university education, and shilling 16.8 billion to the Higher Education Loans Board. Mr. Speaker, as a government that deeply cares for its most vulnerable members of society, I have proposed shilling 17.6 billion for cash transfers to the elderly persons, shilling 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, and shilling 1.1 billion for cash transfer to persons with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 4.3 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net Program, shilling 2.5 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project, shilling 3.5 billion for Kenya Development Response to the Displacement Impact Project, and shilling 400 million for the National Development Fund for persons with disabilities, and a further shilling 720 million for purchase of a building for these vulnerable members of our society. Mr. Speaker, to enhance equity and reduce poverty, I have proposed shilling 41.7 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, shilling 2.1 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund to promote regional equity and social development, and shilling 6.8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in marginalized areas. Mr. Speaker, to address the challenges that our youth continues to face, we have dedicated resources to youth empowerment programs and supporting businesses by youth, women, and persons living with disabilities. In this regard, I have set aside shilling 10.2 billion to the National Youth Service, shilling 2.1 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment Program, shilling 359 million to the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, shilling 82 million to the Youth Employment and Enterprise WEZO, and shilling 150 million to the Women Enterprise Fund. Mr. Speaker, our prosperity as a country is to a larger extent hinged on our ability to take full advantage of the rapid technological advances. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, the government continues to invest in this area to boost digital literacy and skills, as well as expand digital infrastructure to improve access to affordable broadband connectivity. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed shilling 14.9 billion to fund initiatives in the information communication technology sector. Specifically, shilling 700 million for the government shared services, shilling 800 million for the digital literacy program, and shilling 1.2 billion for rehabilitation of national optic fiber backbone phase 2 expansion cable. Mr. Speaker, the government is fast-tracking the establishment of the Konza Technopolis City, which will position Kenya as a world-class ICT hub. For this reason, I have enhanced allocation to the project by setting aside Kenya shilling 6.3 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1 for Konza, Kenya shilling 400 million for the ongoing construction of Konza Technopolis Complex phase 1B, and Kenya shilling 5.1 billion for Konza Data Center and Smart City Facilities Project. Mr. Speaker, sports, culture, tourism, and arts contribute immensely to our economic development by boosting job creation for our youth and generating foreign exchange. To support this sector, I propose an allocation of shilling 14 billion to the Sports, Arts, and Social Development Fund. I have also set aside shilling 2.5 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund and shilling 3.8 billion for the Tourism Fund. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to invest in clean water supply and put in place measures to control floods and harvest rainwater, as well as protect the environment. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 82.7 billion to support environment and water conservation. In particular, shilling 42.6 billion is geared towards the development of water and sewerage infrastructure. Shilling 10.9 billion for the management of water resources, and shilling 8.6 billion to support water storage and flood control. This includes shilling 500 million earmarked for the initial works for the construction of Korusoin Dam along River Nyando, and shilling 1.3 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 10.9 billion to support conservation of forests and water towers. Shilling 10 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, shilling 10.8 billion for wildlife conservation and management, shilling 2.7 billion for environmental management and protection, and shilling 1.6 billion for meteorological services. This allocation excludes the provision under the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four agenda. Further, Mr. Speaker, the government will implement the Kenya Financing Locally Led Climate Action Program to deliver climate finance at the local level where its impacts are felt most. To start off the project, I have proposed to allocate shilling 100 million in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, to sustain the drive against corruption, instill good governance practices, and recover corruptly acquired assets, I have enhanced allocation to the institutions mandated to fight corruption. In particular, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 3.1 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and a similar amount for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. Shilling 149 million for the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority, shilling 158 million for Asset Recovery Agency, shilling 619.1 million for the Financing Reporting Center, shilling 7.9 billion for the Criminal Investigation Agencies, and shilling 5.2 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, to support the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I have proposed shilling 37.3 billion to Parliament and shilling 18.1 billion to the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, in the financial year 2020-21, county governments have been allocated shilling 369.9 billion, which comprises 1. Kenya shilling 316.5 billion as equitable share, shilling 13.7 billion as additional conditional allocation from the national government, shilling 30.2 billion being external loans and grants, and shilling 9.4 billion from the Roads Maintenance Levy Fund. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, the national government and the Nairobi City County government entered into an agreement through which the county transferred some functions to the national government. To manage the transferred functions, the national government established the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. In order to facilitate performance of the transferred functions, the Nairobi Metropolitan Services has been allocated shilling 26.4 billion in the financial 2020-21, which includes shilling 15.95 billion from the Nairobi County's equitable revenue share for the financial 2020-21 and Kenyan shilling 660 million as additional conditional allocations related to the transferred functions. The balance of Kenyan shilling 9.78 billion will come from the county's local revenue. The NMS has also been allocated Kenyan shilling 1.5 billion from the national government's equitable revenue share to finance the Mukuru renewal project. Mr. Speaker, further to the Presidential Directive of February 2019, the National Treasury, jointly with other stakeholders, has finalized the development of an integrated development management system for county government. The system, which is aimed at eliminating leakages and high revenue collection costs of the county, is expected to be in place by the end of the financial year 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that the county government's Revenue Raising Process Bill 2018, which was sponsored by the National Treasury, has recently lapsed. In this context, I have resubmitted the draft bill to the Attorney General so that it may be reintroduced in Parliament. The principle underlying the proposed legislation is that counties may not impose, vary, or waive a tax, fee, or any other charge in a way that materially and unreasonably prejudices national economic policies, economic activities across county boundaries, and the national mobility of goods, services, capital, or labor. I appeal to honorable members to reconsider the merits of this proposed legislation, which was developed through a widely consultative approach that incorporated all key actors, including institutions of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, in line with the Presidential Directive on the settlement of pending bills, Kenyan shilling 36.7 billion, representing 71.5% of the total eligible bills verified by the Auditor General, has been settled by the county government as at May 2020. I urge county government to clear outstanding bills by 30th of June 2020 and ensure no further build-up of expenditure arrears. Mr. Speaker, in the financial year 2020-21, beneficiary counties have been allocated Kenyan shilling 6.8 billion under the Equalization Fund. I am aware that there are disbursement arrears, and I wish to give an assurance that future allocations will be enhanced to make up for the shortfalls. Mr. Speaker, in a High Court ruling of November 2019, the guidelines on administration of Equalization Fund were declared unconstitutional, null and void. Effectively, the Fund's Advisory Board was disbanded and all operations halted, including payments for ongoing projects. The ruling directed that the National Treasury to develop a new Equalization Fund statutory instrument. In compliance with the ruling, a new draft statutory instrument for the fund has been developed and is ready for gazettement and tabling before Parliament. I'm also aware, Mr. Speaker, the existence of a 2019 private members' bill on the Equalization Fund, which was passed by the National Assembly and is currently before the Senate. In this context, I wish to propose honorable members to initiate a process to harmonize efforts to achieve sustainable administration of this fund. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution requires the two-third levels of government to conduct their mutual relations based on consultation and considerations, and to respect the functional and institutional integrity of government at other levels. The objective is to achieve whole government approach to provide synergies and common size delivery solutions. Mr. Speaker, towards this end, the government will leverage on the intergovernmental framework for the implementation of national government programs and projects at counties formulated in 2019 to harmonize implementation of plans such as the Big Four development agenda, as well as policies between the two levels of government, including planning and budgeting. This is part of efforts to achieve an all-government approach to development. Mr. Speaker, the rest of my statement is on tax measures for the financial 2020-21 budget contained in the Finance Bill 2020, which I submitted to this House in April 2020, in line with the requirements of the Public Finance Management Act 2012. Further, I will highlight measures on cushion duty as agreed at the regional level during the East African Community Pre-Budget Consultation meeting for the financial year 2020-21. These measures are expected to generate about Kenya shilling 38.9 billion in tax revenue to the exchequer. Mr. Speaker, manufacturing is a major pillar in the Big Four agenda, where the government aims to increase the contribution of the sector to GDP from about 8% to 15% by 2022. In this regard, I have proposed at the regional level measures aimed at promoting local manufacturing and also measures to ensure that locally manufactured products are competitive. Mr. Speaker, the customs measures that have been agreed upon at the regional level shall, in accordance with the East African Community practice, be effective from 1st July 2020. I wish to highlight a few of the measures that have direct impact on Kenya manufacturers. Mr. Speaker, our metal and allied sector continues to face stiff competition from imported iron and steel products. In order to protect the sector, the rate of import duty of 35% with the corresponding specific rates on a wide range of these products have been maintained for another year. Kenya has sufficient capacity to produce paper and paperboard products. In order to protect manufacturers of these products from cheap imported products, we have maintained the import duty rate at 25% for another 1 year. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has capacity to manufacture baby diapers. However, the imports used in manufacturing these products attract import duty. In order to support manufacturing of the products locally, all inputs for manufacturing of baby diapers will be imported duty-free under the South African Community Duty Remission Scheme. In addition, to promote local production of new clothing and apparels, including fashion and design, imports used in the textile and apparel sector will be imported duty-free under the scheme. Mr. Speaker, the telecommunications sector provides good opportunities for innovations, particularly for our youth. In order to stir growth in this sector and encourage local investment, import for assembly or manufacture of mobile phones will be imported duty-free under the South African Community Duty Remission Scheme. Mr. Speaker, leather and footwear sector has capacity for manufacturing footwear considering we have adequate raw materials. It is important for this sector to be protected from cheap imported products in order to encourage investments in the sector. In this regard, we have maintained the specific rates of duty in addition to 25% duty rate, which were granted last year. This will also safeguard government revenues by curbing undervaluation of such imported products. Mr. Speaker, there is need to protect local producers of electrical parts and accessories. In this regard, we shall be applying the imported duty rate of 35% instead of 25% on such products for 1 year. Mr. Speaker, the East African Community region has agreed to grant duty remission on raw materials and imports for manufacture of masks, sanitizers, ventilators, and personal protective equipment, including coveralls and face shield. This will enhance measures aimed at containing COVID-19 in addition to encouraging local production of such products. Mr. Speaker, as a long-term measure, the East African Community region has agreed to amend the East African Community Customs Management Act to exempt from import duty supplies for diagnosis, prevention, treatment, and management of epidemics, pandemics, and health hazards to deal with any future occurrences of such nature. Mr. Speaker, the government introduced a simplified monthly rental income tax in 2016 to enhance tax compliance. Under this regime, the rental income is taxed at the rate of 10% for individuals earning annual rent income of Kenya shilling 10 million and below. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya shilling 10 million per annum threshold has brought positive impact on tax compliance. I therefore propose to raise this threshold to Kenya shilling 15 million per annum in order to bring more landlords to the simplified regime. Mr. Speaker, some companies continue to declare losses year in, year out, hence not contributing to the exchequer in terms of tax revenue. However, these companies enjoy facilities such as infrastructure, whose cost of construction and maintenance is serviced by the government through tax revenues contributed by other patriotic taxpayers. In order to ensure all taxpayers contribute to the construction and maintenance of our infrastructure, I have proposed to introduce a minimum tax that will be payable by all companies at the rate of 1% of their gross turnover. Mr. Speaker, with the first advancement in technology, many business transactions are increasingly being carried out through digital platforms. In some cases, due to the nature of the transaction, it is difficult to effectively tax the income derived through such platforms. It is therefore necessary to provide a framework that will facilitate taxation of such income. In this regard, I propose to introduce digital service tax on the value of transactions at the rate of 1.5%. Mr. Speaker, food security is one of the pillars of the Big Four agenda, and the government has put measures to support its implementation, including food production. To further this agenda, I propose to exempt maize or corn seeds from the value-added tax in order to make them affordable to our farmers. Further, I have proposed to exempt ambulance services from VAT in addition to medical, nursing, and dental services, which are currently exempt from VAT to cushion Kenyans from the high cost of such services. Mr. Speaker, to enhance tax compliance, I propose to introduce a voluntary disclosure program to allow Kenyans who in the last 5 years may have inadvertently made omissions in their tax returns to voluntarily disclose such omission and pay tax due. The program will run for 3 years. In order to encourage uptake of this program, I further propose to grant relief for penalties and interest in respect of the tax disclosed after payment of the principal tax. Mr. Speaker, currently, imports by Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Services are charged import declaration fee and railway development levy. These charges reduce budgetary allocation of these institutions. I have therefore proposed to exempt from both the import declaration fee and railway development levy on all goods, including materials, supplies, equipment, machinery, and motor vehicles imported for official use by the Kenya Defence Forces and the National Police Service. Mr. Speaker, the government has been encouraging investments under the public-private partnership, particularly in the road sector. To further such partnerships, I propose to amend the Public Roads Toll Act to enable the persons who enter into an agreement with the government to collect road tolls on roads constructed and managed under such agreements. Mr. Speaker, the budget I have presented today involved making hard decisions in the quest to move our country forward. Faced with limited resources, the balancing has not been easy. We have channeled resources to cushion citizens and businesses from the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as interventions to support economic recovery. I firmly believe that the measures spelled out in this budget will create more jobs and transform the lives of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of these measures is our commitment to protect the lives and livelihood of citizens and support recovery of business. I believe that working together, we will withstand the current storm as we have done in the past. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, allow me to express my gratitude to His Excellency the President for his leadership and wise counsel in the management of economic and financial policies of this country. I would also like to thank my fellow cabinet secretaries, principal secretaries, and their staff for contribution in the financial 2020-21 budget process. For their support during the preparation and approval of this budget, may I sincerely appreciate. My appreciation goes to honorable speakers of both National Assembly and the Senate and their respective clerks for overseeing the approval of submissions on the budget estimates, the financial 2020-21. Majority Leader, especially Honorable Duale of the National Assembly, as well as the Majority Leader of the Senate, Pugisio for their relentless support to get most of the legislative proposals on finance matters passed through Parliament. Members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, led by the Chairman and the Parliamentary Budget Office, for the constructive and comprehensive engagements in their approval process for the budget estimates for financial year 2020-21. Members of the Departmental Committee on the Finance and National Planning, led by the Chair, for their commitment and diligence in the approval of various tax laws process during the year. All members of the various departmental committees of the National Assembly and Senate for their cooperation and support. The management and staff of Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank of Kenya, all financial sector regulators, and the various agencies under the National Treasury and Planning for their contribution and advice during the budget process. The Commission on Revenue Allocation and its chairperson for their contributions. Management and staff of National Treasury, under the leadership of the Principal Secretary, Dr. Muya, the officers tirelessly worked long hours, including most weekends and holidays, notwithstanding the constraining COVID-19 environment, to ensure that all budget and economic documents for the financial year 2020-21 are produced not only timely, but of high quality. These are the unsung heroes of this nation, and I appreciate the extra effort in this exercise. The management and staff of the State Department for Planning for the support, staff from the Attorney General's Office, our multilateral and bilateral development partners, as well as the private sector for their contribution to our development agenda through their technical and financial support, and the members of the fourth estate for actively keeping Kenyans informed of the developments in the country and their budget process for the financial year 2020-21. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I must express my sincere gratitude to Kenyans from all parts of the country for their insightful contributions, proposals, and suggestions as we finalize this budget. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has been disruptive to our lives. I call upon Kenyans to pull together in the fight against the pandemic. Let us give safety and security of each other a priority. Follow the mandatory guidelines issued by the government on COVID-19 prevention as the country carefully and slowly begins to reopen for business and economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank our gallant health personnel who are on the front line of the COVID-19 war. Indeed, we can't thank them enough. May God bless them and their families for putting their lives as a shield for the rest of us against the virus. Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget the men and women in uniform and all the security personnel for maintaining law and order and safeguarding the security of the country. Mr. Speaker, my great appreciation goes to all Kenyans for demonstrating good citizenship by cooperating and supporting the government in this fight. Together, we have made good progress and still need to forge forward in our Kenyan spirit that we will win this war. Equally, Mr. Speaker, our heartfelt gratitude goes to the business community, donors and individuals who continue to donate resources to the Emergency Response Fund. The private sector has equally ensured that there are food supplies on our shelves, sanitizers are readily available, as well as masks that have greatly supported the common humanity. Mr. Speaker, I am well aware that the success of the measures I have outlined today will depend on the health behavioral change of our people. This strict discipline has been ably demonstrated by the health professionals in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. Let us all pull together in observing the various protocols as advised by the Ministry of Health. I thank you all. May God bless you all and the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, in April 2020, I submitted the budget estimates together with accompanying documents. As I conclude, I further submit the following documents to this August House and request that you receive them. 1, budget statement for 2020-21 financial year, budget policy statement for the year 2020-20, estimates of the revenue grants and loans for financial year 2020-21 budget, financial statement for financial year 2020-21 budget, 2020 medium-term debt management strategy, budget highlights, the Mwananchi Guide, financial year 2020-21 budget, and finally, a statistical annex of the budget statement for the financial year 2020-21. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.